The Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 534 states, "The finding of Jesus in the temple is the only event that breaks the silence of the Gospels about the hidden years of Jesus. Here, Jesus lets us catch a glimpse of the mystery of his total consecration to a mission that flows from his sonship. Did you not know that I must be about my Father's work?" Mary and Joseph did not understand these words, but Mary kept all these things in her heart. The statement is carefully constructed. It acknowledges the silence. It frames the silence as intentional, hidden years, not lost years. And it extracts from a single incident at age 12 a theological principle that explains away the absence of information about the next 18 years. The implicit claim is that nothing happened during those years that requires documentation, that Jesus was engaged in ordinary life until the moment his public ministry began at approximately age 30, and that speculation about the missing period is unnecessary because the silence itself is meaningful. The position is defensible only if one accepts that the Gospels are complete and that their omissions are as inspired as their inclusions. The problem is that the omissions create a vacuum, and vacuums invite filling. The apocryphal traditions filled it enthusiastically. The infancy Gospel of Thomas, dated to the 2nd century of the Common Era, describes the child Jesus performing miracles, animating clay birds, striking dead a boy who bumped into him, cursing a teacher who tried to instruct him. The stories are fanciful, theologically problematic, and rejected by Orthodox Christianity as non-canonical. But they reveal the discomfort early Christian communities felt with the gospel silence. A divine Savior who existed for 30 years before beginning his mission required explanation. If he was fully divine from birth, why did he not act divinely? If he was fully human, what did he do during the years when most men were learning trades, marrying, and establishing households? The canonical Gospels provide no answer. Luke's Gospel notes that after the temple incident at age 12, Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man, and then jumps directly to his baptism by John in the Jordan. Matthew and Mark begin their narratives with the adult Jesus. John's Gospel opens with theological poetry about the Word made flesh, then skips to John the Baptist's testimony. The silence is consistent across all 4 canonical accounts, and consistency suggests intention. The question is, whose intention? The traditional answer is that the silence reflects the Holy Spirit's guidance of the Gospel writers, who included what was necessary for salvation and omitted what was not. The critical answer is that the silence reflects the absence of information. The Gospel writers, working decades after the events they describe, had access to oral traditions about Jesus' public ministry, but little or no reliable information about his early life. The infancy narratives in Matthew and Luke are themselves sparse and contradictory. Matthew has the family fleeing to Egypt to escape Herod's massacre. Luke has them returning to Nazareth after presenting the infant Jesus at the temple in Jerusalem. The 2 accounts cannot be harmonized without special pleading. If the evangelists lacked reliable information about Jesus' childhood, they certainly lacked it about his adolescence and early adulthood. The silence is not theological mystery. It is documentary gap. The gap has been filled by theories ranging from the plausible to the absurd. The most restrained propose that Jesus worked as a carpenter, or more accurately, a tekton, a craftsman working in wood and stone, in Nazareth, helping to support his family after the presumed death of Joseph, who disappears from the gospel narrative after the temple incident. This theory requires no evidence beyond the gospel's identification of Jesus as the carpenter's son and the cultural expectation that sons learned their father's trades. It is the default position of mainstream scholarship and popular piety. It explains nothing but offends no one. The more adventurous theories propose travel. The Russian artist and mystic Nicholas Roerich claimed in the early 20th century that Jesus traveled to India, studied with Buddhist and Hindu teachers, and returned to Judea with a synthesis of Eastern and Western spiritual wisdom. Roerich cited Tibetan manuscripts he claimed to have seen in the Hemis monastery in Ladakh, which described a saint named Isa who visited India during the missing years. The manuscripts, if they ever existed, have never been independently verified. Scholars who have visited Hemis report no such documents. The theory is popular in New Age circles and has been repeated in countless books and documentaries, but it is not taken seriously by historians of early Christianity or Buddhist studies. The linguistic, geographical, and theological problems are insurmountable. Jesus taught in Aramaic within a Jewish apocalyptic framework. His parables reference Palestinian agriculture and village life. His debates engage Pharisaic halakha and Torah interpretation. There is no trace of Hindu or Buddhist thought in the canonical Gospels. The silence about the missing years is not evidence of travel to India. It is evidence that no one who knew Jesus during those years found anything worth recording. A variant of the travel theory places Jesus in Egypt, studying with the Therapeutae, a Jewish ascetic community described by Philo of Alexandria. This theory has slightly more plausibility because Egypt was geographically accessible, because Matthew's infancy narrative already places the family there briefly, and because Jewish communities in Alexandria were centers of Hellenistic learning. But the Therapeutae were contemplative celibates who renounced property and family ties. Jesus' public ministry shows no sign of such training. He ate and drank with sinners. He was accused of being a glutton and a drunkard. He traveled with women. He attended weddings. His teaching style was oral, parabolic, and confrontational, not the systematic exegesis practiced by Alexandrian Jewish scholars. If he studied in Egypt, he learned nothing that shows up in the Gospels. The British Israelite theory, popular in certain Protestant circles in the 19th and early 20th centuries, claimed that Jesus traveled to Britain with his uncle Joseph of Arimathea, who was supposedly a tin merchant with trade connections in Cornwall. The theory rests on medieval legends with no historical foundation and has been thoroughly debunked by serious scholarship. It persists in fringe literature and folk traditions, particularly in Glastonbury, where local lore claims that Jesus visited as a boy and that Joseph later brought the Holy Grail to Britain. The theory is harmless as legend, but worthless as history. It explains the silence by inventing a narrative that has no evidentiary basis and contradicts everything we know about first-century Galilean peasant life. The Essene theory is more sophisticated. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered at Qumran between 1947 and 1956, revealed a Jewish sectarian community with practices and beliefs that overlap in intriguing ways with early Christianity. The Essenes practiced communal meals, ritual baptism, and apocalyptic expectation of a Messiah. Some scholars have speculated that Jesus, or John the Baptist, or both, had contact with the Qumran community during the missing years. The theory is plausible to the extent that Qumran was geographically close to the Jordan Valley where John baptized, and that Jesus' cousin John lived an ascetic lifestyle in the wilderness that resembles Essene practice. But the differences are more striking than the similarities. The Essenes were separatists who withdrew from society to maintain ritual purity. Jesus engaged society, touched lepers, ate with tax collectors, and violated Sabbath regulations to heal the sick. If he trained with the Essenes, he rejected their core principles. And if he rejected them, the training explains nothing about his later ministry. The theory survives in popular literature because it sounds scholarly and because the Dead Sea Scrolls lend it an aura of archaeological credibility, but it has not convinced mainstream New Testament scholars. The silence is not an accident of transmission. It is a feature of the gospel genre. The Gospels are not biographies in the modern sense. They are theological proclamations structured around the kerygma, the announcement that Jesus is the Messiah, that he died for sins, that he rose from the dead, and that salvation comes through faith in him. The events that support this proclamation are the baptism, the ministry, the crucifixion, and the resurrection. The missing years do not support the proclamation. They are irrelevant to the theological message, and so they are omitted, not because they were scandalous or secret, but because they were ordinary. The ordinariness is the scandal. A God who spends 18 years doing nothing remarkable is theologically difficult. The Docetic heresies of the 2nd century solved the problem by denying that Jesus was truly human. He only appeared to have a body, only seemed to grow and age and work and live. Orthodox Christianity rejected Docetism and affirmed the full humanity of Jesus. But the affirmation created a narrative problem. If Jesus was fully human, he experienced the full range of human development: childhood, adolescence, adulthood. He learned. He made mistakes. He changed his mind. He grew in understanding. Luke's statement that he increased in wisdom is the only canonical acknowledgement of this development, and it is placed safely in childhood before the reader might ask uncomfortable questions about what kind of mistakes a teenage Jesus might have made or what kind of doubts a 25-year-old Jesus might have entertained. The Quranic account offers a different solution. The Quran mentions Jesus' miracles in infancy, speaking from the cradle, creating birds from clay, but says nothing about the years between childhood and prophethood. The silence is the same, but the framing is different. Jesus in Islamic tradition is a prophet, not divine, and prophets receive their mission at a specific moment of divine calling. What happens before the calling is irrelevant. The Quran does not need to explain the missing years because it does not claim that Jesus was God, incarnate from conception. He was a human being chosen for a prophetic mission. The missing years are simply the years before the mission began. Christianity, with its doctrine of the Incarnation, has a harder time with the silence. If Jesus was God from the moment of conception, then every moment of his life is theologically significant. But the Gospels treat the missing years as insignificant. The tension is resolved by asserting that the silence is itself significant, that the hidden years reveal something about humility, obedience, and the ordinary life that God sanctifies by living it. But the resolution is asserted, not demonstrated. The Gospels do not say this. Later theology does. The historical question is what a Jewish man in 1st century Galilee would have been doing between ages 12 and 30. The answer is mundane: learning a trade, working to support a family, possibly marrying, though the Gospels never mention a wife. And early Christian tradition is unanimous that Jesus was celibate, attending synagogue, observing the feasts, studying Torah, engaging in the ordinary religious and social life of a small village. The missing years were not missing to the people who lived through them. They were simply unremarkable. Jesus became noteworthy only when he began his public ministry, and it is that ministry, not his carpentry, not his adolescence, not his family relationships, that the gospel writers were interested in preserving. The gap in the record has been exploited by those who want to import foreign influences into Christianity. Every claim that Jesus studied in India or Egypt or Britain or with the Essenes is an attempt to explain his teaching as derivative rather than original, to find precedents for his message in other traditions, and to deny that his mission was the direct revelation of God in history that Orthodox Christianity claims. The theories persist not because the evidence supports them, but because the silence invites speculation. And speculation, once published, is hard to dislodge. The claim that Jesus traveled to India has been refuted repeatedly in academic literature, but it continues to circulate in popular books and internet forums because it offers a narrative more exciting than he worked as a carpenter in Nazareth. The institutional position that the silence is intentional and that speculation is unnecessary is a defensive posture. It protects orthodoxy by declaring the question out of bounds, but it also concedes that the Gospels do not provide the information necessary to reconstruct a historical biography of Jesus. The early years are lost, not lost to suppression or conspiracy, but lost to the indifference of history. The people who knew Jesus during his childhood and adolescence either did not recognize anything exceptional about him, or they died before the gospel writers began collecting testimony, or they told stories that did not serve the theological purposes of the evangelists and were not preserved. The result is a gap that cannot be filled with evidence, only with imagination. And imagination, whether pious or skeptical, is not history. The question that remains is whether the missing years matter. For faith, they do not. The theological claims of Christianity rest on the public ministry, the death, and the resurrection. What Jesus did as a teenager has no bearing on the truth or falsity of those claims. For history, the missing years matter only to the extent that they frustrate attempts to write a complete biography of Jesus. Historians can describe the social and economic conditions of first-century Galilee. They can reconstruct the probable daily life of a Jewish craftsman in Nazareth. They can contextualize Jesus' teaching within Second Temple Judaism and the Roman occupation. But they cannot tell you what Jesus was thinking at age 20, or whether he traveled beyond Galilee before his ministry began, or what events or experiences shaped the decision to leave Nazareth and seek baptism from John. The silence is absolute. And the silence will not be broken by new discoveries, because the missing years were never documented. They were lived, forgotten, and erased by time. What remains is the ministry. What is lost is everything that came before. And the loss, in the end, is not evidence of conspiracy or cover-up, but evidence of the ordinary truth that most lives, even extraordinary ones, are lived in obscurity until the moment when something happens that makes them worth remembering. The institutional statement stands. The silence is acknowledged. The speculation is dismissed. And the question remains, what did Jesus do during the 18 years between the temple incident and the baptism in the Jordan? The answer, if it exists, is not in the archives of Hemis Monastery, not in the libraries of Alexandria, not in the scrolls of Qumran, and not in the apocryphal Gospels. It is in the silence itself, the silence of sources that were never written, testimony that was never given, and a life that was ordinary enough that no one thought to preserve it until it became, for reasons the missing years cannot explain, the most documented and debated life in human history.